It's just that my chef, he came with like that real old school New York culture. And he was like, you know, he could be super mean, super aggressive. And I'm like, that's not going to work in Asia, you know? We had an employee stab another employee once. These guys would get harassed by the police and by immigration services. Yeah, so I would literally have to go down there and the guy is in this paddy wagon. You know, we sold a slice of pizza for 10, 12 ringgit. Malaysians are so spoiled with their food because they could go to a mama corner stall and get rice, 2 vegetables, and a protein for 8 ringgit. And it's really good food.
Yeah.
You know? So that's, you know, one of the reasons why Malaysia is like this great value for money. And
Amazing
it's
value.
another reason why a lot of these like Michelin star restaurants come here and they fail.
Yeah. We've got a podcast to shoot. Where's the camera? Welcome back to another episode of Honey Never Sleeps. I'm Bagg, and today we're going to be talking about sales, marketing, and business in general. But this time we're going to be talking about F&B and the story of Mike Helfman, who took a pizzeria from 0 outlets to 20. Mike, introduce yourself.
Hey, well, I'm, you know, as you said, I'm Mike Helfman, right? And we're in KL. I came here originally from the United States, and it was all serendipitous, really. Like I had no intention. I've been here for 15 years. I had no intention of being here that long.
Why
Actually,
did you come?
16 years. Well, originally it was for a job, right?
Okay.
So I came at the time. I was in Houston, Texas, originally from New York, but I was in Houston, Texas, where I was helping out with hurricane relief from Hurricane Ike back in
Oh,
the
wow.
day, right?
Okay.
And I knew it was time to just get out of New York, so I went west, and it was kind of like that go west young man, you know. And my time there,
The
it
American
ended.
way.
Yeah, exactly, pioneer. So I ended up going all the way west, halfway around the world. And but it started out with a company called Big Media Plus, based out of Europe, out of Belgium. They did a recruiting program in the United States. I went to Europe. We trained there heavily for a month, and they would just weed people out. It was like some deep-seated
Hunger
training.
Games for media buying.
Yeah, Hunger Games for media consulting.
Okay.
Because I mean, they were taking kids in their 20s. You know, at the time I was 26, 27 years old. And there were other kids that were younger than me, and they were taking these young kids in their 20s and training them to speak with like the top CEOs and top government officials around the world. So after you made it through this rigorous training program, they then assigned you to different countries. And I was lucky enough to get assigned Malaysia.
Malaysia.
So
Did you know about Malaysia before you were assigned it?
I knew of Malaysia because I backpacked around Southeast Asia previously. And yeah, I forewent Malaysia like many other people do, right? Because it doesn't really have that great of a brand in terms of branding, right? So I did the whole typical Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and I forewent Malaysia, but I knew it was there, so I was excited.
Malaysia's not the typical backpacking destination.
No, I mean, I think it should be because Malaysia's great. It's got everything, right? But the problem is it doesn't, Malaysia's always in the middle of the road. It never swings too far to the left, too far to the right. They don't want to be pioneers in doing things,
Wait
right?
and see.
Yeah, wait and see, right? Thailand leaned into tourism big time. Singapore leaned into finance. Malaysia is just truly Asia, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because it is this multicultural mix of Asian cultures all in one melting pot. And it doesn't really have that like real identity in a sense from a branding standpoint. But I think it's got everything. It's got the best infrastructure in Asia. It's got great beaches. It's got, great urbanscapes in terms of KL.
One of the best places to live in Southeast Asia from a lifestyle perspective. I lived in Manila for 6 months, and the congestion, it was just cramped living quarters, super expensive as well.
Hmm.
I was a kid, I was 25, I had a studio, and for the cost of a studio, I had a 3-bedroom apartment here in KL.
Hmm.
Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah. The value for money here is definitely like best in the world.
Definitely.
I mean, it truly is a hidden gem that people don't know about.
And what made you stay? Like, did you just fall in love with the culture? Like, you came here for a job?
Yeah, so I came here for this job, but I mean, I was thrust into I was very lucky. I was thrust into an amazing situation. I got here, I got picked up from the airport by a driver,
Mm-hmm.
took me to this, 5-star hotel. I was living in hotels for the first 9 months that I was here. The first year that I was here, I lived in hotels. I bounced around Traders, Mandarin, just different hotels, and it was all paid for by the company, or we managed to barter it in lieu of advertising space within the products that we were offering, right? So we'd say, all right, we'll give you an ad in this magazine for 90 room stays, So I lived there for a month and a half. Free buffet breakfast every morning, chilling at the pool. So I stepped into a great situation, right? And on top of that, I built up this great network, right? Through the access that I had. So I was working on a publication called Wall Street Market Research. So our job was essentially do a macro overview of the Malaysian economy, put that into print format, sector by sector, and then essentially use that publication to try to track foreign investment.
Okay.
And the business model was we'd meet with ministers and we'd interview ministers for the publication. Then we'd get their support, and then we'd meet with, GLCs and private sector companies to help support the thing. But point is that I built up a great network here, and then we raised like 1.5 million pounds.
Oh wow.
And then my company said, all right, it's time to move on. So went to Singapore, was there for a couple of months. They said, okay, we want you to go to the Philippines. At that point, I was kind of missing Malaysia a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And I built up such a great network and a great friend group. I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to Malaysia and start my own business. So
Malaysia is very welcoming for new arrivals, especially, expats coming in. You do make a network really quickly, and they're great friends, great people, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing about being like an expat or a foreigner in another country. Everybody who's doing that, it takes something special to do it, right? Because you're moving halfway around the world or a long way from home. And when you meet other people that are in that same situation, it's like you're all in it together. In a sense. And it takes a certain kind of person to do that. Not everybody does that. That's why, most people stay at home, or, some people don't even leave the town that they grew up in, So it does take a certain kind of person to do that. And I think that's like that sort of a common bond amongst immigrants, amongst expats, whatever you want to call them, right? So anyway, getting back to the story, I then started my own company, which was a media company, and I essentially took the business model and transferred it to television. So I was making business documentaries now, and we would air those on CNBC in the United States. And I'd always been interested in video media, visual media, which is why now I do what I do, which is invest in films and produce films. But there was this weird kind of period in between where I got into the F&B business, right?
Yeah. So why that big move, right? You were going in, you were media, you were film, you were essentially in a marketing space. And why did you make that bold move? I mean, F&B is one of the highest failure rate forms of business you can possibly start. And you did it in Malaysia.
Yeah.
Which is, low cost food, Malaysian grub, and you did New York pizza.
Yeah.
So kind of tell me what made you do that bold move
It,
and that kind of leap of faith at the beginning.
it really just came out of necessity for myself because I missed a proper slice of pizza, right? This is a long time ago. We're talking about like 13 years ago, okay?
Mm.
Yeah, I've been here 16, so we're talking about 13 years ago. Like at that time, there were no pizza places in Malaysia.
Yeah.
There were Italian high-end Italian restaurants where
Yeah.
you could get pizza, and then there was Pizza Hut and Domino's,
Yeah,
and that was
garbage.
it, right? Which is not pizza as far as
Yeah.
I'm concerned. Excuse me. So I really miss New York City's pizza, and the idea came about when I was actually on a beach in Thailand, just walking with my now wife, and there was a little hawker stall essentially selling pizza by the slice, as if you would in New York.
Yeah, yeah.
And out of principle, I had to buy one. So I bought a slice, and it wasn't the greatest. It was all right, but it planted the seed of that idea that, hey, this could actually work in Malaysia, right? We could actually, and at the time, there were other entrepreneurs in the F&B space that started this kind of fast casual, customizable or unique food, right? So
Like stuff, that kind of
no, like I would say
custom
the
burrito.
kind of like that fast casual, but in the burger space,
Okay,
really.
yeah.
So higher quality fast food burgers, and shout out to Burger Lab
Yeah.
and KGB Burgers. They really took the market by storm in the burger space, right? Because prior to that, you had to go to a bar or a high end restaurant or McDonald's. So it's kind of the same scenario in terms of market, right?
Okay.
So I looked at that and I said, okay, this can work for pizza too. And that's when I started Mikey's. That's when the idea started, and I started doing market research, right? I would go to Domino's. I'd sit out there for hours and just watch the deliveries go out. I'd speak to managers of stores and say, hey, what markets where do you send your food?
Wow.
What are the busiest times, right? So, I did that in terms of market research. I figured out the best location would be Bangsar, which is where we are right now. Just a few blocks from where we are is where my first restaurant was.
I've eaten there.
Yeah,
I actually ate there. Yeah.
Thank you. It was on Talawi 2. We opened in April of 2010, I believe, or 2020. No, excuse me, 2012.
Okay.
And so it was a big leap.
Yeah. Did you face any challenges around like the local palate? Because just as a Domino's case study, the Domino's in the UK is so much different to the Domino's here. The bread, the sauce, it tastes completely different.
Yeah.
And so obviously Domino's had adjusted themselves to this palate. And obviously your vision was to bring New York style pizza.
Yeah. So I struggled with that. I know I struggled with that, but I did know that I needed to bend a little bit. I needed to be somewhat compromising. And what you're saying is that's the exact reason why Domino's is so dominant here, because they really adapted to the local flavor. Whereas Papa John's, which is another rival fast food company, did not. They did not compromise. They did not adapt to local flavors, and they failed.
Yeah.
So now with us, I knew nothing about the restaurant business. Like I'd worked in a restaurant in college as a busboy for like a summer.
Yeah.
That's my extent of working in a restaurant business. And that was a high-end 5-star restaurant. So I knew I needed help, and I immediately sought New York chefs. So I put an ad in Craigslist, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I put an ad on Craigslist.
The most unusual place to find help.
But you know what I did?
What help you're looking for?
I mean, I said my ad was, travel the world, make pizza, and I got some really good.
Did you get some weirdos?
No, I didn't. I got some really, really good applicants, and one of them stood out, and his name was Andrew Bellucci, and he was a really interesting character. I mean, he gave me a great pitch, right? I asked him to come up with a plan of initial, because I knew I didn't want just one restaurant. I wanted multiple restaurants from the beginning. I wanted a growth plan, right? And I wanted someone who could be an operator and who could execute this plan. So I said, what part of the interview was make me a presentation, a plan of how you would grow one restaurant to 5 restaurants and show me how the logistics of that would work. And he made this video presentation. It was very well done.
A video presentation, but like 13 years ago.
Yeah.
Which was unheard of.
Yeah. I was quite blown away by it. Right.
Yeah.
But not only that, he was also this really big, boisterous Italian guy. Like he just fit the mold. Like I'm like, I can build a business around this guy alone. And not only that, he additionally had a great lineage, so to say, in terms of he reopened one of the most famous New York pizzas called Lombardi's Pizza down in Soho, right? So that was the oldest pizzeria in America. And it went in business continuously until like the late 70s, early 80s, and then it went out of business. And it was out of business for like several years until Andrew reopened it in like the late 80s, early 90s. And he was a huge success. New York Times reviews, he was killing it, crushing it. And then he got arrested by the FBI.
What for? This is why he's on Craigslist.
Prior to that, he previously had a job at a law firm where he embezzled some money. And then fled to France and learned how to become a chef in French style from like Michelin star chefs.
I feel like he needs to be on the podcast next.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But after he left Mikey's, he had a great story. I mean, he got arrested by the FBI, spent a couple years in the federal penitentiary, came out, drove a taxi cab for a while. Wow. That's when I found him, when he was driving a cab. And he kind of, made this resurgence into the pizza industry, helping me, work for Mikey, open Mikey's. He's a co-founder of the business. And then I guess I'll continue with his story. After he left Mike, there was a point where, it was just apparent that we didn't really need him anymore. Mikey's had grown into this bigger company. He wanted to do more. He wanted to be more artisanal, and he wanted to open his own place. So he went to New York and he worked for the famous Joe's Pizzeria, where he then, opened a place for them in Shanghai, opened a place for them in Michigan. And then he opened a place. He finally got his own pizza place in Astoria, right? With a business partner. And things went wrong. Wow. And he had to open another place, and he named it the same name and opened it across the street, right? Right up the street. So it's like one of these classic New York pizza fighting stories. And it blew up. It did really well. And he had a great business partner, and he was killing it. He got a review in the New York Times as the best clam pizza in America. Wow. And unfortunately, he then passed away. He had a heart attack while making a pizza.
Wow. But doing what he loved.
Doing what he loved, exactly. Literally. For me, I feel like that's probably the best way he could have went out, right? Granted, it was at the peak of his career, but that's also kind of what made him like a legend in now the New York pizza industry. I mean, people know who Andrew Bellucci was. Like all the heavy hitters went there, and he's the guy who was my co-founder for Mikey's. Yeah. So,
to talk about like that partnership, so he exited from Mikey's Pizzas. How did that go with you? Because obviously, something I talk about people who are going into partnerships with others, and I think everyone should get a co-founder. I mean, it's very lonely to do it alone. You're far more effective with somebody in your team working together. But he obviously lost interest in this. He wanted to go artisanal, and you felt, at least from what you described just now, that the business didn't necessarily need him anymore.
Yeah.
Was there conflict around that?
I mean, it wasn't conflict, but it was just he wanted, the name of the place was Mikey's.
Okay.
He wanted Bellucci's. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like he wanted more of the limelight. Okay. And I get it. Like he's the real, he was the artist behind the pizza, whereas I was more of the marketing and the conceptually driven business person behind the restaurant brand. So he basically just wanted his own thing. And he never had shares in the business. It was more of a profit sharing kind of relationship. So it wasn't, he was a co-founder in a sense that he was there with me when we started and but he never had shares in the business.
But he obviously got a profit share. So that's another way of being a co-founder anyway. You don't necessarily have to have shares.
Yeah.
Going back to how you started, you ran a business before. Did you exit that and then do this with some of the cash? Because obviously you've got to put up quite a lot of capital to actually start or open a restaurant.
So I mean, the other business that I had before was a really small business, right? It was kind of just myself and and an assistant, and then I
Okay.
outsourced everything,
Yeah.
right? I outsourced production, I outsourced design, so I outsourced everything. So it was very easy to wind that business down. And what I did was I essentially just took the cash from that and I inflected that into the restaurant business, and then I brought on a couple of additional investors,
Okay.
and we had, I think there was a group of 6 of us who
Okay.
were invested in the company, and the initial startup capital was I think it was about 600K, some maybe
Okay.
600 700
Ringgit.
thousand ringgit, yeah,
Okay.
for that first restaurant, and yeah, so I brought Andrew over here, and I showed him the place that I want. We looked it up, but the next challenge was creating the pizza with the ingredients,
Back to that
sourcing
palette.
the ingredients,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We had to get it as close to New York pizza as possible. So sourcing the ingredients was a challenge. I mean, even just getting a pizza, yeah, like a
Pan.
pizza, yeah, pizza screens. Getting pizza
Mm.
screens, we had to order those from the United States. We had to order certain ingredients from Italy, certain ingredients
Okay.
from the U.S. We tried to utilize as much local ingredients as we could, and it was a challenge for him, getting that right. And it's fun when you're in the restaurant business. It's almost like it's like chemistry, right? Like really like chemistry, just mixing ingredients. And it's also like science in terms of just using deduction. Like
Mm.
you would say, okay, is it going to be 60% water, 40% flour,
Mm.
and you just continuously change and experiment
Mm.
with different mixtures of
Mhm.
food for different ingredients,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And you write it down in a book, and that's how you come up with the recipes
Yeah. Yeah.
until
Yeah.
you get it perfect. And so that was a challenge getting that. Then the fit out wasn't so much a challenge. I had a pretty good fit out guy that I liked. I had an idea. I knew what I
Mhm.
wanted to do with the concept, but you have to find vendors for everything.
Yeah.
You don't know
Did
who
you
these
use
guys
a
are.
team? Did you like outsource finding lots of different vendors to do the fit out, or the fit out guy was basically right? I know how to get the ovens and all the gear that you need, and they
No,
sort it all out.
no, we designed the kitchen ourselves,
Okay.
because and that was super important because we wanted to make it flow as seamless as possible, right?
Mm.
Like try to create like that McDonald's style but for pizza,
Yeah.
where every piece of space was used and
Hmm.
utilized efficiently. Um,
A conveyor belt of pizza.
yeah, I mean, but at the same time maintaining the highest of
The
quality,
quality. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
handmade,
Not
right?
becoming Domino's,
Yeah,
basically.
not becoming Domino's, but trying. I mean, Domino's is yeah. I mean, they're essentially an internet company. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not. I mean, you go there, they're super efficient. There's like 1 or 2 people in the
Mm.
place, right? And they're just taking orders. But yeah, we wanted to maintain artisanal, and so that was all a big challenge. Not coming from the F&B industry, like
Mm.
creating a kitchen. I mean, even for him, because he hadn't been in the restaurant business for 10 years. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
So we finally got that down. And then the next big challenge was hiring people. And
Mm.
that was a major challenge because
Mm.
it not being a local, it was very difficult to tap into the local network,
Yeah,
right?
because a lot of local restaurants are typically employed by like Myanmar kind of stuff,
Bangladesh,
Bangladesh,
India,
and then you got to bring them
Nepal.
in kind of with a worker manager kind of firm, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, we didn't even know. I didn't even know any of that.
yeah,
I mean,
you now
my
know
yeah. Now I know it.
it.
But back then, I wanted all locals. Like
Mm.
I didn't want foreigners. I wanted it to have like a very local
Malaysian,
vibe.
yeah,
But
yeah.
you know what? You just couldn't do it. I mean, we found out that typically the way it works, like the Malaysian mentality is you either have to be in that group and like it's all word of mouth
Mm.
and know people, or they want to work at like a really established brand like a McDonald's
Hmm.
or Burger King. While it might not be prestigious, but it's still McDonald's, right?
It's a job.
Or they want to work at like a high-end hotel,
Mm.
or a high-end restaurant.
Mm.
Since our segment of the market was fairly new, it was like we were kind of in between, and
Yeah.
we didn't have that local network to tap into. So when we put up the help wanted sign, it was all basically freelance foreigners. So we didn't even go to an agency at first. We did eventually, but it was freelance foreigners, and you know, there's a big disconnect there in terms of service, level of service, and level of what you want. So there was a major training period. I mean, we were training when we had no furniture in the store.
Yeah.
We were training when we had hardly any kitchen. You know, we were pretending to be customers. We set up a whole training.
Makes me think of the movie The Founder. Have you watched it where they draw on the tennis courts, the kitchen, and then they're all practicing?
I mean, that's what we did. That's what we did when we were designing the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
We didn't draw it on a tennis court. We drew it on a piece of paper.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I kind of just imagined,
Yeah,
me and
yeah,
Andrew
yeah.
would just imagine in our head how it would work. And then we brought them in to see how it would work. And we were like 90% there, right? By the time we opened the second restaurant, we had gotten to like 95%. The third restaurant, we had it down 100%.
Yeah.
But the idea from the beginning was to try and make this, you know, a franchise, right? So everything that we did, we wrote down as an SOP, standard operating procedure, right? And
that's so critical because you can't scale anything without the processes in place.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Yeah.
You have to do that. And if you made a mistake, we try to write down, record the mistake so that we wouldn't do it again, right? And try to like make a list of things not to do as well. And it's just process of elimination, right?
You sweated the small things essentially.
Yeah.
You know, you looked at those small details. One little thing wasn't working, so you fixed it.
Yeah. And I don't want to pretend like it was like that from day one because it wasn't. I mean, day one,
it never is.
It was fun. It was fun because, you know, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. And for me,
I bet it's fun now in hindsight, but at the time it was probably a bit stressful.
It was stressful, but I kind of, my personality is like, I thrive in stressful situations. I thrive in the chaos. Like I love chaos for some reason, right? Man. So those first few weeks, I mean, and for us, it was weird because it wasn't like a typical restaurant. We caught lightning in a bottle. I mean, the first week we had an article in Eat, Drink, KL.
Okay, yeah.
And there were lines going out to the street.
Wow.
So it was nuts. We had
got so lucky at the beginning.
Yeah. We had to learn how to
No one had tasted your pizza yet, but there was a queue outside the street practically.
Yeah. Wow. That Eat, Drink, KL article came out. He was our first lunch customer, I remember. And I didn't really know who he was. Only after the fact did I find out who he was.
He did a review.
He did a review, and it just literally. So we had to learn how to do crowd control.
Your first pizza was good. Your first lunch pizza, you didn't bugger it up.
Yeah. And Andrew wouldn't let us open without having the pizza done. You know,
had a perfection.
And I kept putting pressure on him. I mean, he was there all night. So it was madness. I mean, I was greeting customers at the front. I'd go to the back. I'd start slicing. I'd start pouring drinks. I mean, I was doing everything. I was all over the place, right? And it was like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes, you know, I felt like I was in a battle, fighting against the crowd.
That's what working in a restaurant is, right? It's war.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's fun. I mean, especially when the team is going and everything is cohesive, like you feel like you are just humming.
A unit.
Yeah, you feel like a unit, and it's there's an adrenaline rush, and that's why people are in it. That's why the show The Bear is so successful.
I love that show
because that's what it's like. You know, I mean, it's great. But then there's times when you're in the weeds and like the tickets just start piling up, and you're like, "Fuck, where am I gonna? Where do I start?" And you just have to like, all right, settle down, just start here, and just start checking things off one at a time, and just get it done. You know, but as time went on, we learned how to manage the crowd. We learned how to manage the flow of ordering and flow of food and having an expediter. And it was fun. It was a fun environment. So I think getting back to your, like, how did we incorporate local stuff? We did. We had a few local pizzas. So out of our 10 pizzas, I think 2 of them were localized. One of them was called the 911, which was just a super spicy pizza.
Yeah, okay.
And we actually held a contest around that pizza so that if you could eat a whole pizza in 40 minutes or less, you won, I think it was like 500 ringgit.
And it was like a burn in your mouth.
It was a super duper. We used ghost peppers from India that we sourced from Assam, India, which is like the birthplace of ghost peppers. And we bring them in by like 10 by kilos.
Yeah.
You know? And we had some pretty fun experiences with
So
those.
this ended up being kind of how you marketed the brand in a way. You obviously got that lightning in the bottle moment where
Yeah.
one of your first ever customers ended up having such a massive network,
Yeah.
the magazine, that it just blew you up. And then you're doing this kind of come in and see if you can test your mettle against these pizzas. Is that how you were doing your marketing to kind of launch? Because if you're so stuck in the weeds, how are you even thinking about marketing?
No, yeah, there was no marketing at the beginning. There was zero marketing, and we didn't want to market really much because we wanted the food to speak for itself. So we felt for the first couple of years, we felt that marketing was like cheap. It would cheapen the brand.
Yeah.
So we didn't want to market. We wanted to just let it be word of mouth, and that's really what happened. It was purely word of mouth, and that first 6 months was nuts, and and it maintained that. So I started looking for second locations,
Yeah. Yeah. So
and
already in the first few months.
in I'd say first 6 months, I started looking for second locations
Wow.
after about 6 months.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was
That
good.
was that the plan, 6 months, or you've had such
It
an immediate
was. Look,
success?
I'll be honest. Like, yeah, we just had such immediate success that I was like, yeah, let's do
Let's
it.
go.
Let's open a second one, right? In hindsight, I wouldn't I wouldn't do it that way. In
Okay.
hindsight, I would have expanded slower.
Okay.
Because once we opened that, because you don't really know what you have the first six in a
Yeah.
restaurant business, right? So a lot of restaurants are super hot for a couple of months and then they die. I mean, luckily we weren't. But when I did open that second restaurant, which was in Monchiara, I did see some attrition to the first restaurant.
Okay.
There
'Cause
was
people are
cannibalization.
closer to, yeah.
Yeah, there was some cannibalization. There was like a 10% cannibalization,
So,
maybe more.
so this kind of makes me think about where you ended up, because you scaled from, one outlet to 7 outlets, and then with all the licensing, I think it's about 20, right?
23. Technically it was
23.
23, yeah.
So, you know, obviously
Because we did end
scaling
up closing down some.
Yeah.
That's why.
Okay. But scaling up to that many kind of operations, firstly, ob- obviously you realized that this was going to be scalable right from the beginning because that was your business plan. But how did you ensure that when you open these new outlets and eventually the licensing model, that you maintain that quality, that you kept every location performing? Because obviously you're going to lose something from the magic that you had in the first one, right? So how did you maintain that if I go and have a 911 pizza in your Monkey area, it's as good as the one in Bangsar and all of that?
I mean, from being behind the scenes, I know that we maintain quality from restaurant to restaurant. It was the same pizza, right? But it's different when it comes to a consumer because
Yeah.
I heard it from people like, "Oh, yeah, the pizza's not as good in Publica or Mid Valley as it is in Bangsar
Yeah.
because in Bangsar we painted a picture, we created an atmosphere with Andrew because you've got this big fat Italian guy
In the
behind
back
the counter
shouting.
making pizza,
Yeah.
shouting at people, right? That gives it atmosphere, it gives it culture.
Yeah.
And when you go, and then when you go to Mount Chiara or you go to Mid Valley, and there's a Bangladeshi guy back there making pizza,
Yeah.
who granted is doing it just as well, and has probably made more pizzas in Malaysia than Andrew. The pizza's the same,
But the atmosphere.
but the visualization, the atmosphere, the way the customer experiences it might be a little bit different. Because it doesn't have that same, like, you're not painting that same picture. All of a sudden, it feels manufactured. It doesn't feel authentic,
Isn't
right?
that's the case with a lot of franchises though, that start with maybe a charismatic leader or what have you, and then they try to scale it. There's always parts of it lost.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really good examples of that would be like TGI Fridays, right? Like now, that's like your typical, franchise,
Yeah.
that restaurant franchise that's around the
Not what it
world, right?
used to be.
But it really started in New York City as like a corner, like barn restaurant that was like really cool and really good at the time. I think it was the 80s or something. And then now, you look at it and it's just like it's a franchise, right?
Yeah.
There's no soul to it, And I think that's kind of what people were saying in some of our other outlets. And it wasn't a big percentage of people, it was a small percentage. It was those people that experienced the magic of
at the
Bangsar in the
yeah,
first beginning, right?
Yeah.
It was because that was magical.
Yeah.
And then but for other people who would never experience that magic in Bangsar, you know, going to Mid Valley Mega Mall or going to Cheetah Mall or going to Publica, it was fine. It was normal
Yeah.
to them. Like it was still really good pizza.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And but you know, the restaurant business is weird. So to grow that big, we did experiment in different ways, right? Like we had a central kitchen, and we had our central kitchen maintain quality to all of our outlets.
Okay.
But the thing about a central kitchen is that it's just a money eater. It's a money sucker, right? It doesn't really it doesn't monetize because all you're doing is employing people
It's
to
the
make
cost.
food, and
Cost center.
then on top of that, you have a logistical business as well because you have to ship that food to different locations all around the region, right? So we did that for a while until we realized maybe it wasn't the best way to do it. We kind of pared it down where we had a central kitchen, but we had less employees in the central kitchen, and we managed to figure out ways to get everything, all the prep done in the individual outlets.
Yeah.
So when you have one restaurant, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier to manage, right? When you have two restaurants, it's easy to manage. When you start getting into 5 or 6, you get into this weird space where all of a sudden, you know, you kind of need a corporate team,
Yeah.
but the business isn't like big
You need
enough
a
to be
HR
able.
for crying out loud.
Right, you need
Yeah.
you need HR, you need
Yeah.
accounting, you
Yeah.
need marketing, right? You need a regional, like a GM.
To go
So
to. Yeah.
yeah, so and we built that up eventually, but it's a weird space where you're kind of like you can afford that because you have all these positions now that aren't working in restaurants that are just corporate.
Yeah.
There's just corporate infrastructure. So you're in this weird position at like 5 or 6 restaurants where it's like you can afford it, but you're not really maximizing it. So to really maximize that, you need to have 10, 20 restaurants, right? Where that corporate infrastructure pays off. Otherwise, my advice to people opening restaurants would say, be small. And
Stay
you
lean.
don't need a central kitchen. You don't need a corporate HQ. You know, try to keep everything in their own outlets for as long as you can until you absolutely have to build that corporate infrastructure. And you need to be super profitable in order to do that because that corporate infrastructure, it's not going to bring you any money.
Eat your
It's going to eat your
margins
bottom
all day
line.
long.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, so we scaled up, and then you know, during the and not only were we a restaurant business, we were a delivery business from the beginning. Before Grab, before Food Panda, we were doing delivery.
People will call you up. You have a little laugh.
Yep, people called us up. People called us
Back
up.
when you still used to have the little pizza pamphlets in your on the side.
Oh yeah,
Takeaway pamphlets.
we had takeaway pamphlets. We had guys canvassing neighborhoods, throwing menus on their doors. We had a WhatsApp line. So we had a WhatsApp delivery line.
Wow.
That's how we ran it on WhatsApp.
You're early adopter for that because although now WhatsApp is obviously everywhere,
Yeah.
and it was there for people just general communication, but a business using it to take pizza orders.
Yeah.
I imagine this was before the business app.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is just some guy on a WhatsApp.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it was. It was like somebody always had to manage the phone at all times, right?
Yeah.
And that's how we did it. I think at the time there was a service called Room Service, I think it was called. And they actually got bought out by Food Panda. My friend founded that company. It got bought out by Food Panda for a lot of money. A lot of money. And Food Panda just absorbed them when they came in and took it and ran with it and digitized it essentially. And Food Panda was first, and then Grab came. And Grab actually consulted us on what kind of food delivery bags to use because they wanted to make sure that they could fit our pizza boxes at first.
In their vans.
Yeah, and there were other companies as well, not just Grab. There was a company before Grab. I can't remember their name. We worked really closely with them, but they ended up going out of business.
Yeah.
They designed their bags around our pizza boxes.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that company, but they went out of business, and then Grab came, and we were a very early adopter to Grab.
And how did you do it? So I was reading, in fact, there's a book behind you, The Diary of CEO Stephen Bartlett, and I was reading a book, an article about, it was actually about Domino's and all the pizza companies. They essentially would get tons of calls going, "Where's my pizza? You know, I ordered my pizza 40 minutes ago. Where's my pizza?" And so many companies like invested in heated bags, da 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 da. Just if it's not there in 30 minutes, you get the pizza for free or free breadsticks or etc. And Domino's became the tech side, and they decided to build the pizza tracker. And as soon as they built the pizza tracker, all those calls of "Where's my pizza?" dropped by like 95%. And so I'm imagining, and I'm not sure about the local, how it is in Malaysia, but back in the UK, if I didn't know where my pizza was, I would call up and go, "Hey, you got my pizza? Where's my pizza?" Did you have a lot of that, or did you how did you navigate that? Or was it not really a problem?
I mean, we were okay. We were pretty good. We got that occasionally. If we got slammed, I
Yeah.
remember one night I felt so bad for this couple. It was on New Year's Eve,
Oh,
and they were having like a New Year's Eve party, and we were just absolutely slammed. And I can't remember what happened, but I remember the pizza ended up coming like 2 hours late.
shit.
But it happened on rare occasions,
Yeah. Yeah.
And if something like that happened, we give them vouchers. We'd say, look, we'll give you free pizzas next time you want to order. Try to keep them coming back, that kind of thing. But it wasn't a regular occurrence. So we were but what I was getting at before is that we were ahead of the curve on delivery, right? So when the pandemic happened, we were all fully set up for delivery, and we were thriving. We actually thrived during the pandemic, and it took, especially during the first phases of the pandemic, until everybody caught up, and then everybody got on Grab, and then we saw a little bit of a slowdown. But by that time, that's when we started licensing out the business, because everybody wanted a piece of the delivery business, and we happened to have a partnership with a company called FBev, which was Food and Beverage Ventures, and they had licensed out. We had two brands. We didn't just have Mikey's New York Pizza. I had another restaurant brand called NY Burger Co.
Okay.
And that was in Mont Chiara in 1MK Mall.
Okay.
And we also coupled that with a Mikey's in Cheetah Mall. So we kind of co-branded the same way that like KFC and Pizza Hut would do, where you'd have two outlets sharing a location, right? So we did that in
Or even like Pizza Lab, they do it with the coffee shop.
right.
Yeah.
Right. So we did that. We did that. In order to get two brands in one location, which a lot of places are doing now, because rent is so high, especially in like New York City and other places where you can have multiple restaurants in one location, right? So we did that, and these guys love the burgers, they love the pizza, so they ended up licensing 10 NY Burger Co locations and 10 Mikey's New York Pizza locations.
Wow.
And they did that through virtual kitchens and physical outlets, like a mixture of both. So at that point, we had the central kitchen cooking, because we had all of our outlets as well, and that we were making money off the central kitchen. At that point, we monetized the central kitchen.
As soon as you could do basically virtual kitchen, just mass
to the
delivery.
licensee, because they would have to buy the ingredients from us.
Yeah, okay.
That was part of the
And
deal.
they would cook your ingredients.
And they would cook our ingredients.
Shit.
That's how we could ensure quality. You see, and I mean, if you're going to license a franchise, right, and you have to give them SOPs, right? So we created a book. We actually had to hire somebody who was quite expensive. I mean, we did as best we could, and we handed it to these professional franchisors, and then they created like a professional booklet for us, which would be the Mikey standard operating procedures on how to do everything, from what equipment you need to buy to open a restaurant, how many chairs, what kind of kitchen utensils, to all the different ingredients, all the recipes, how it's prepared, specifically how it's wrapped, everything, right? How you speak to customers, lingo, the whole nine.
Yeah.
Right. So
and then they have to buy in to your franchise, essentially. They buy the licensing.
Yeah. So we made a deal, and part of that deal is they have to buy the ingredients from us.
Yeah.
And at that point, that's when you have a central kitchen, because at that point, the central kitchen is monetized. Not only are you getting money from your restaurant, the central kitchen is no longer a money sucker.
Yeah.
You can actually make it break even or monetize it.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes worth it. But you just have to grow to a certain amount of outlets to do that.
And kind of changing gear a little bit, when you're starting a food business in Malaysia, you're starting a licensing in Malaysia. I imagine things are quite complex around even being able to open the restaurant, food safety, and then other intricacies of Malaysia. How did you kind of navigate getting yourself set up with kind of the regulations here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't. It's we just we knew what licenses we needed to get. I don't know how I found that. I had some friends, I think, who also owned restaurants. So
Okay.
I kind of like
Hey,
networked
what do
with
I need,
them
man?
to
Yeah.
find out, because I went in blind, right? I mean, and it wasn't even frankly, it wasn't my intention to be as involved with the restaurants as I was. It's just that my chef, he came with like that real old school New York culture. And he was like, he could be super mean, super aggressive. And I'm like, that's not going to
I'm
work
gonna
in
work in
Asia,
Malaysia.
So I kind of had to like step in and from an operations
Yeah.
standpoint, which was never really my intention. I
No.
kind of wanted to just be the CEO
Yeah, yeah.
of the restaurant and just manage the finances, but I kind of had to step into the operations because I was afraid that, he was going to kill one of our employees. But I mean, we had some wild things happen at my restaurants. I mean, we had an employee stab another employee once. We had a manager go after a female employee. We had to fire a lot of people. Like, this kind of thing happens in the restaurant industry.
Crazy.
Yeah, there were
How'd
just
you react to getting a call? Hey, Joe just stabbed Eric.
I was like, what? What? So obviously we came down to the restaurant, found out what happened. We had to fire the guy immediately.
Yeah.
Obviously, we also had to call the police
Mm.
because you can't let something like this really go. I think, in fact, the employees had called the police and he'd already been arrested.
Yeah.
And then the funny thing that happened was the guy who got stabbed and his faction of friends who worked at the restaurant kind of felt bad about the employee who got arrested. So they went to the police station like a day or two, 3 days later, and
Said, oh,
pleaded
it's
to let
okay.
him go. And I think he actually ended up getting out
Wow.
and no charges. And
So they dropped the charges.
yeah, they dropped the
So, oh, it was an
charges.
accident. Leave it
It was
alone.
everybody kind of understood, and it was,
Wow.
I don't know if money was paid. I don't know what happened, but
Perhaps.
he got out, right? And
So you found yourself having factions in some of your
yeah, there were factions
restaurant
amongst
politics.
the races, really. So
Wow.
like if you had Bangladeshis working, like they would group together and almost form sort of a union,
Mm.
right? But at the end of and we would have to negotiate with them, and at the end of the day, it was really just about recognition. Because look, these guys work hard. They
Yeah,
come
yeah.
over here, and they work hard, and
And they send
frankly,
all their money back home.
they send a lot. Yeah, and we had some really great like stories from these guys. They were like, boss, because we work for you, I now own 3 houses in Bangladesh.
Wow.
I rent 2 of them out. One of them's for my family.
Wow.
But one of the real challenges in terms of working with foreign workers was like these guys would get harassed by the police and by immigration services. Like there were times where I would get calls sometimes at night, 10 o'clock at night. Boss, I've been arrested by immigration. Can you please call? And these guys had all the right papers. They had everything, but I don't know if they were in the wrong place at the wrong
Yeah.
time or they didn't want to.
They do raids. They just want to pick people up.
Yeah, so I would literally have to go down there and the guy is in this paddy wagon and be like, who's in charge? Okay, this guy works for me. He's got all the proper paperwork. Look, here it is. This is it. And they'd be like, they'd look it over. They'd bring the guy in charge down. Okay. All right, let him out.
Wow.
And they let him out.
And if you were busy or like
Yeah, if I was
unavailable,
right, he'd
this
he'd
guy's
have to be
gone.
locked up for a couple of days,
Yeah.
and that happened to some guys.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'd have to be locked up for a week or 2 weeks, a few days. And I remember one time we had we did bring in a service, right? And it was a bunch of Filipino workers.
Yeah.
And they all had the proper paperwork and everything. And I don't know what happened. I wasn't around, but one of them somehow got picked up. And he was gone for like a solid 2 weeks, but he came back. His head was shaved. He lost some weight.
Wow.
We're like, wow. And they were like, yeah, the conditions are really quite harsh in there. So I kind of feel bad for these guys. They come here and they do the jobs that nobody else wants to do, and they end up getting harassed, by the police or by immigration. And at the end of the day, I know that the police and the immigration are just trying to do their job, right? But I feel like sometimes they use a really broad sword, and they should be a little bit more precision. the funny thing is it changed from this was a long time ago. We're talking about, a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, some of the other things that were kind of eye-opening is we would get these inspectors coming around, and they would ask, they'd find things that were wrong that weren't wrong. Or for example, one of the things in Bangsar that was famous was that they would say, "Oh, you need to have a license to have outdoor seating," right? And then we went to DBKL, and there's no license for outdoor seating that's required to have outdoor seating.
Yeah.
So and of course, they'd say, "Oh, you'd have to pay a summons, or you can just handle this on the spot." And we would just say, "You know what? We'll pay the summons. Write us up a summons.
Yeah.
No problem." So that was like dealing with that kind of situation was interesting. But I've got friends who dealt in other parts of the city where they'd have to pay protection rackets, like to these, gangs and to these mafias. And we never had to deal with that. Being in Bangsar, we never had to deal with that. But guys in KLCC, Bukit Bintang area, they'd have to pay protection money every month, security money.
Protection money, I believe, in KLCC, so they don't raid you.
That's a possibility. I never had to pay that. I never had to. I was never in the alcohol business, so we didn't have raids. We didn't have raids, but yeah, I imagine bar owners having to deal with that kind of thing. But that's why they had these security. They also have to pay security. But yeah, so basically, in the end, like one of the things that really made me want to exit the restaurant business was that that you're constantly dealing with these small little problems. And granted, I wasn't really dealing with it, right? Sometimes it came up the food chain to me occasionally, but there was a famous story in Bangsar that had nothing to do with any of my restaurants. It actually had to do with a banana leaf restaurant, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a perfect example of the mentality gap that there is between an owner and a worker coming from overseas, like fresh off the boat.
Yeah.
Right. So the story goes, and it was caught on video, and the restaurant ended up going out of business shortly thereafter. I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but what happened was there were some foreign workers. I don't know if they were from Bangladesh or India, but they were caught washing dishes in a puddle in the alley.
I heard this. I think it's Debbie's Corner.
No, it wasn't Debbie's Corner. It wasn't Debbie's Corner. It was a restaurant that was there for like 6 months.
Yeah,
it was on a corner.
Yeah,
but it wasn't Debbie's Corner. I used to love going to Debbie's Corner.
Yeah, same.
But I can't remember the name of the restaurant. Anyway, it doesn't matter because we're out of business now. But yeah, they caught these guys, washing dishes in a puddle in the alley. And the thing is, it wasn't malicious. Like, these workers weren't doing it to like try to poison the customers.
No.
They just didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And to me, I recognize like the mental gap is just so wide as to what we want to achieve and as to where the current mentality is for fresh off the boat workers. This isn't for everybody, right? And that kind of like disheartened me a bit. Right. And that was like the moment where I really started thinking about exiting, because I just knew that I was never going to be able to achieve the perfection that I wanted to with what I had available to me. So when my licensee came to me and said that, they had just got a new round of funding from, the government to acquire local restaurants to turn into franchises or expand franchises, I kind of jumped on it. I said, "Good, let's talk. Let's see what you have to offer."
So that's kind of where your decision making came from in terms of exiting. It was just this. You're kind of tired of dealing with these like mountains out of molehills, and you're never going to get to that perfectionism that you want because there's just such a gap.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, like at that point in the business, I wasn't really dealing directly with the small problems. It was mostly going through managers, and then if it was bigger, it would get hicked up to our general manager for the group, and then if it was really big, it would come to me. But most of the time, I was kind of insulated from that. And at that point, I was going from restaurant to restaurant, doing quality inspections for fun.
Get a pizza.
Yeah, just going having food, right? Walking through the restaurant. But most of the time I was dealing with the accounts department. I was dealing with the marketing guys. I was dealing with the GM,
Mm.
right? So I had built this little corporate team.
What do you think made your franchise to be as attractive as it was for acquisition?
I think that we had a unique product. I mean, we were the first real pizza company to open a pizza restaurant solely dedicated to pizza, particularly New York pizza. I mean, we introduced New York style pizza to
Mm.
Malaysia. And frankly, I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I think that we were one of the pioneers in terms of opening pizza restaurants and in the pizza game in Malaysia. Because now, I mean, the pizza game in Malaysia is really good, right? Like, there's a lot of great restaurant brands out
Mm.
there. You know, you've got like Pizza Mansion, you've
Yeah.
got Proof Pizza, Heritage Pizza. There's a lot of really good pizza restaurants that are dedicated solely just to pizza, and that
Yeah.
wasn't there before we opened up. So I'm kind of proud of that in terms of legacy. But I mean, like I said, the real seed was planted when I just saw that gap, and I was like, you know what? Maybe it's time to start thinking about exiting.
Yeah.
And it's you're right. Yeah, just not being able to get that perfection. And maybe, to achieve perfection, you
Mm.
need perfectionists. I mean, imagine like you or me
Mm.
going to Bangladesh and trying to learn how to create Bangladeshi food and like
Mm.
have the appreciation for it the same
Yeah.
way that they do. You're
Yeah.
just not going to get it, right?
No.
It's like it's impossible, right?
Yeah.
And what am I going to do? Hire a bunch of Americans or expats to work in the restaurant? It's just not going to be profitable here because the price points aren't the same as they are in the US. And and it but that being said, there are local high-end restaurants here
Mm.
that are achieving unbelievable success and they're
Mm.
unbelievable quality as well.
Yeah.
And that's when you're getting these locals who all appreciate the food culture because
Yeah.
Malaysia is an incredible food culture,
Yeah.
right? And that was one of the problems I think we had too with our price point in terms of like, we sold a slice of pizza for 10, 12 ringgit,
Mhm.
right? A normal cheese slice of pizza. Now imagine Malaysians are so spoiled with their food because they could go to a mama corner stall and get rice, two vegetables, and a protein for 8 ringgit.
Mm.
And it's really good food,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? So that's, one of the reasons why Malaysia is like this great value for money. And
Amazing
it's
value
another
for money.
reason why a lot of these like Michelin star restaurants come here and they fail.
Yeah.
A lot of these
There's a
Chinese
very
Michelin
small
star.
percentage of people who are willing to pay big amounts of money for food.
Correct.
When you can go, like we were saying, to Mamak in 8 ringgit, you got a delicious meal.
Yeah, a banana leaf. You
Yeah.
get these really high quality, low cost meals here. So
Yeah.
it's hard to compete with that. That's why you have to have like your own little niche, which we did, but if and where like it fosters this food culture in
Yeah.
Malaysia. And that food culture does resonate into these higher end restaurants. I mean, there are a lot of really good restaurants in
Yeah.
Malaysia that are creating. I mean, look at Dewakan, for example. I mean,
Mm.
Darren Chin is killing it over there. I think I think he might have 2 Michelin stars, if I'm
Mm.
not mistaken, right? But there's also a lot of restaurants that you don't hear of that are blending Asian fusion,
Yeah.
Western quality, and these restaurants are incredible. I mean, I used to
Yeah.
do restaurant reviews for Malaysia Tatler for a
Oh,
while.
wow.
Like I was writing for a couple of years. I did several restaurant reviews for them as like a hidden
Yeah. Yeah.
as a hidden food reviewer, and it was fun. And I got to go to a lot. I still go to a lot of really good restaurants all the time. I mean, the Japanese food here, the quality Japanese food here is better than the United States. It's better than any
Yeah,
Western
it's
country that
phenomenal.
I've been to. It's like very close second to Japan itself. I think it's very good. So there is high quality food being done here, and when it is being done, it's mostly being done by locals,
Mm.
and they're putting together these teams that are really really good,
Mm.
and they're able to integrate their Malaysian culture with Western culture or Chinese culture or whatever, and creating these unbelievable dishes. So I don't want to disparage anybody from getting into the restaurant business,
Mm.
especially if you're creative, because I feel that like a lot of creatives are getting into the restaurant
Yeah.
business now, especially chefs.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen a lot of restaurants popping up where it's like Malaysian chefs who worked or study abroad come back and try to bring some of the learnings that they've got from working in Paris or London or New York and things like that. And actually, there's a beautiful restaurant in Chinatown that I went to called Pickle, and it's this Malaysian Malay guy who worked in restaurants in Paris, and he's come back and pickling all the food and has created an amazing,
It's
beautiful.
on my list. I really want to go.
It's fan. I went there to the opening test nights, and it was phenomenal. The food was incredible. I've been several times since, so I
Oh,
recommend
yeah,
strongly.
yeah. It's been on the list. The thing is, like with me, once I find a place that I love, like
Keep going
I
back.
really, it's in the
Yeah, yeah,
rotation, you know.
yeah,
And I have this rotation, and it's hard to break into the rotation.
yeah, yeah. I get
Like
you.
when I was younger, like I went to every I wanted to go to every new restaurant opening, right? But then you realize like a lot of these restaurants are good, and then they end up falling off or they go out of business after 2, 3 years. But if you get in the rotation, it's like it's solid,
You're a
you know?
solid restaurant.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And back to my question, obviously you sold to a large organization, and kind of we understand the reasons why you got down to do that. But um, for those that don't know, obviously Mikey's Pizza has closed down
Yeah.
since you exited. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean,
This crash.
it's a little disappointing because I watched it. Like part of my exit package was I stayed on as a consultant for a year to the group,
Mm,
and I was able to monitor the restaurants when I was there. And as time went on, and then when my consulting package ended, I went back because my son was a big fan of the food, right?
mm,
And of course, I like the food too. And
yeah.
so we would go to get food. And I went back and I saw that ingredients were changing.
Mm,
And, I took a picture of the pizza and I said, guys, if you're going to sell this product, this pizza, you're going to lose all your existing customers and you're not going to gain any new customers.
mm.
And then 3 months later,
So it
they
goes on.
went out of business. Mikey's did. I mean,
Yeah.
that group is still operating, but I don't know if they were trying to cut costs
Mm,
or just trying to like integrate into the group. Because when you have that particular company has a lot of different restaurant brands
mm.
underneath them, and when you're operating at that scale, maybe you're trying to buy one cheese that every
Yeah.
restaurant can use, and that cheese might have been different from the Mikey's cheese, but it hurt the product,
Yeah.
and unfortunately they weren't able to operate it. And that's not a new story. I've heard that story about a bunch of other restaurateurs that exited and then they sold it and ingredients
Just
started
fizzles.
changing and quality starts to go
Yeah.
down and it ends up going out of business.
Yeah. And you went through a hell of a journey, right? What it was 13 years ago, right? When you first started Mikey's Pizzas, about 13 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So that journey from the hustling in day one where you're doing that crowd control and managing millions of tickets to getting restaurants to dealing with all the workers and
Yeah.
going to rescue them from the police. Would you do it again?
Yeah, I do it again. I mean, I've been thinking about maybe opening another restaurant, but this
Mm,
time just one restaurant. I don't want to create a brand. I just want to have one place, a place where the boys can come and have drinks
mm,
after work, a place where you can bring your family on
mm.
Sundays. So I have been thinking about it. I still have a restaurant company that's kind of sitting there dormant. I'm like, I got to do something with
You
this,
got an entity that needs to
Yeah,
be
I've got an
used.
entity that needs to be used. So yeah, I mean, it could be a good idea to bring a couple of our friends in as
Thanks,
like
Army.
co-investors. Yeah, I would totally do one in Bangsa. This is my home spot,
Definitely.
and but I think something else about myself is that like I really love being in there at the beginning and and I love the chaos of it and like opening and starting a business, but I don't really like running the business. You know what I mean? Kind of like I'm more of a sprinter than a marathoner.
Mm,
So like once you get down and you start like being a CEO and
mm,
and having to manage these different these different problems and different people. I like starting it. To
Mm.
me, the starting is the fun part.
Mm.
Managing isn't really fun,
No.
you know, and that's why I had a GM who was by the end, by like the last year and a half, 2 years of the business, he was basically the CEO
Running
of the
the
business,
business,
and
yeah.
I was just on auto drives.
I
I
think
started
there's-
actually investing in movies at that point.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of kind of stories about entrepreneurs who are just like that, who kind of they're great starters. They want to just build, 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 but once it's built, want to move on to the next thing
Yeah,
because we're builders.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and to be an entrepreneur and doing lots of new things, you gotta be a little bit mad,
yeah.
a little bit crazy, a little bit wild to just do stupid shit and see what happens, right? If you were kind of looking back to day one of when you opened Mikey's Pizza, and 13 years later, you go back to yourself and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, it would definitely be not to expand so fast.
Mm.
It would be keep this restaurant open
Mm.
as long as you can. Make sure you've made back all of your money.
Mm.
And then use only profit plus some
Mm.
to open another restaurant.
Okay.
Don't reinvest back into the company because you really don't know what you have in a restaurant until 2 years in, I would say, a year and a half in, right? Once it stabilizes, you know, that, and that's luckily we were able to navigate it, right? Like, but I think a lot of other businesses make that mistake. They expand too fast and then they end up going out of business.
Yeah.
I mean, we luckily had a strong enough business model where we maintained, but it definitely cut our profits. I can tell you that. Like we definitely saw the profit margin decrease as we grew. And we also saw sales kind of thin out amongst the group, right? Granted, we continued to grow, and that's why we did end up, we would close one restaurant, open a new restaurant, right?
Okay.
Because we had too many restaurants in too tight a circumference.
Yeah.
So
That's why the cannibalization was happening.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I would say if I was going to do it again, I would say if you're going to open a second restaurant as fast as you did, open it in a completely new location, a new city, even, like a Penang or even a new country, right? If you know it works here, that would be fun because then they get to travel to visit the restaurants, rather than just driving around the city.
Cool.
But yeah, I think that would be it. Just be a little bit more patient.
Yeah.
You don't need instant success, even though we kind of had that.
But we all sometimes run before we can walk, right?
Yeah, that's what happened.
And I think you've got such an interesting career path, or really, and now you're investing in movies, which I feel like is a whole nother podcast recording to talk about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, really, really great to kind of get to understand more of your story. And I think many people start F&B outlets and restaurants and bars and things like that, and kind of being able to perhaps hear your story of how you navigated some of that will be really useful. So really thank you for coming on the show. And
thanks, man. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it again.
See you on the next one.
See you on my show.
See you on your show. Yeah, so thank you everyone for watching Honey Never Sleeps. And we'll be back on Mike's podcast. See you later.